It wasn't an easy task to comprehend the mess in front of us. The emptiness didn't just appear as a black hole or invisible surface. It was more akin to what one experiences when closing one eye and trying to explain what it sees. Not darkness, nor colors, simply nothing. "Gary, please talk to me," Mary begged as we stared at the break in reality. I looked over to the pills on the table back in the living room. They seemed so sinister then, as if the psychiatrist knew what I was about to experience. There wasn't anything wrong with me. Instead, it was the world that had been damaged. Then I turned to my wife to embrace her, to reassure her that everything would be all right, despite not believing it. But as I went to wrap my arms around her, the world around me simply vanished beneath my feet. I fell into an infinite void of darkness before finally feeling an electrical jolt surge through my body. When I opened my eyes once again, the world around me was blurry. I tried to reach out my arms to gain a better understanding of my surroundings, but they were too weak and in pain. Apart from wriggling around, I could barely move. That's when I realized I was locked inside a glass capsule. Someone was knocking on the glass. A woman standing on the other side.
"Jack!"
she yelled. I tried to respond, but there was something in my mouth. A tube that forced air into my lungs, expanding and deflating them against my will. It was a life support system, but not one found in any hospital. I used all my strength just to reach out my hands, silently begging for the person on the other side to save me. But before they ever got the chance, I was slung back into the reality I had come from. Mary stood over me, trying to shake me awake. "Gary, please," she yelled as I regained consciousness. I was lying on the floor, soaked in sweat. I felt unnaturally cold, as if my body had been dead for hours, completely stiff and pale. "Did you see that?" I asked with a groggy voice.
"See what? You just passed out."
"There was a woman. She called me Jack," I said.
"You were passed out, Gary. It wasn't real."
I wasn't entirely convinced, but the memories were fading all too fast, akin to a dying dream in the early morning hours. For each second that passed, the images of the glass tank and the woman standing above me were disappearing from my mind. I redirected my attention towards the empty space on the wall. It was an impossible phenomenon, one neither of us had the comprehension to explain. Before we got a chance to discuss the matter any further, a loud beep emitted from our television. We turned around, peeking into the living room where a single word had been plastered on the screen. "Run." For a moment, I just stood there dumbfounded and still unconvinced I hadn't absolutely lost my mind. It wasn't until Mary spoke before I snapped back into reality.
"What's happening?"
she asked. I don't know. Then the screen changed. "They're coming," it read.
"Gary?"
Mary tried to say, but we were interrupted by a loud knocking on the door. "Mr. Winmore, open up," a manly voice said from the other side.
"What's going on, Gary?"
Mary asked. "I don't know. Stay here." I opened the door to find two men dressed in dark uniforms. They were both armed, though they weren't wielding their weapons. "Mr. Winmore, you need to come with us," they said. Mary tried to protest, but they ignored her. I tried to calm her down as they ushered me towards their car. As much as I begged for answers, they wouldn't give me any. I turned around to say goodbye to my wife, at which point they violently grabbed my arm. "Take care of her," one of the men said. The other nodded in response before approaching Mary. She tried to walk backwards away from them, but the man was too fast. He gently touched her shoulder, causing her to freeze in place, her eyes lighting up in panic. "Leave her alone," I yelled. But it was too late. Mary had been frozen in place by an unseen force. Her shoulder was locked midair, and whatever was affecting her seemed to be spreading.
I can't breathe.
She managed to get out before her entire chest had been locked solid. It was as if time had stopped only for her, freezing each atom within her body in place. "Mary!" I screamed. The two men pulled me into a car too strong for me to even think about resisting. Once inside, one of them picked up a radio attached to the dashboard. "Initiate Protocol B7 at Stanford Street 7, the man said into the radio. A distorted voice responded, confirming the order. I looked down at my arm. Red marks had formed exactly where they grabbed me. It hurt, even burning as if someone had lit it on fire with invisible flames. The sensation seemed to dig its way through my skin, filling my veins and spreading up my arm. "What did you—" I started to say as my words began to slur. The world before me went blurry, and before I could process what had just happened, I fell into a black void of emptiness. As I lingered in my own unconsciousness, I saw flashes of places and people I didn't know. Despite the unfamiliarity, they awoke an undying feeling of nostalgia within me. I felt at home, though filled with jamais vu. A voice called out through the darkness, breaking through the flashes. "Jack," it whispered. "Wake up." With that, I was thrown back into my own body. I was being held up by the two men that had kidnapped me, and by the look of my surroundings, we were inside an elevator going up. "He's awake," one of the men stated matter-of-factly. "It doesn't matter. He doesn't have anywhere to go." There was only one button visible within the elevator, and no sign to tell us which floor we would eventually land on. Still, minutes would pass before the lift finally came to a standstill. The doors opened. I was pushed into a large empty room too clean to possibly exist in reality. All it contained was a few chairs and a desk covered in documents. In the back of the room, an old rotary phone hung attached to the wall with no visible cables connecting it to a network. "What is this place?" I asked without getting a response. They put handcuffs on me as they forced me to sit by the desk, none of them speaking a word. They just stood there with angry expressions on their face. "What do you want from me?" I asked. "Do you know where you are, Jack?" one of the men asked. He called me Jack, a name that wasn't mine, but that had become all too familiar during the past few days. The pit in my stomach was just barely alleviated by the hopes that it might all be a case of mistaken identity. "That's not my name. I'm Gary Winmore," I basically shouted at the man standing 3 feet away. He shook his head. "Do you really believe that?" "What do you mean?" I asked. "You don't belong here, Jack Lawrence. This isn't your world." His words resonated with me in the most horrific way. Parts of me knew he was right, but I couldn't accept it. My mind wandered back to the little girl I'd found in the alley. Her claims that the world wasn't real rung through my every thought. "This world isn't real?" I half-asked, half-stated. The men looked at each other, a brief moment of disappointment washing over their faces. "Our world isn't yours to destroy," he said while ignoring my question. "Unfortunately, as your awareness of your real life increases, the damage to your surroundings follows suit. It's our job to stop that from happening. Unfortunately, that doesn't leave us with many viable options." I looked around the room again. It seemed so clean, too simple to match reality. Not a speck of dust littered any surface, nor did it produce any echo as would have been the case in such a large, empty space. It felt as if the place wasn't trying to maintain the illusion of being reality. "What are you trying to say?" I asked, though I had my suspicions. That you have to die, Jack. For whatever reason, the words didn't scare. Instead, my thoughts drifted to the girl again, the only other person that had gone through the same thing. The girl, I mumbled. You took her too, I said. The men looked at each other, as if mulling over how to respond to me. She posed a danger to us all. We did what we had to do. You killed her? I asked, half in shock. He just nodded. Though death remains an inadequate description of the process, simply killing your physical body isn't enough. Your entire presence in this world needs to be erased. I was conflicted. If our presence here would kill innocent people, I could hardly blame them for defending themselves. Still, she'd just been a child, and soon I'd suffer the same fate. Why not erase me immediately then? Why did you bring me to this room? Because we need to know where the others are. What others? The others like you, intruders that belong in a different world. With that, the men who'd been silent up to that point brought out a cable attached to a syringe-like apparatus. He grabbed my hair and pushed my neck forward to gain better access before preparing to insert the thing. Wait, please! But despite my pleas, they jammed the thing into the back of my neck. A surge of electricity shot through my body, paralyzing me instantly. I felt my mind disintegrate. The fabric of reality started to fall apart, revealing more outlines of a world that never belonged to me. For a moment, I was connected to it, truly merged with each and every atom. For a moment, I could see everything and everyone in the entire world, with just a few strange identities separating themselves from the rest. I knew then and there that these people were like me, humans that didn't belong. Then, as soon as the ordeal had begun, the information was stripped away from me. I was forced into the wrong world I'd known for my entire life, back in the room with the two men. We got it. Take him to the factory, the main interrogator said. The shock from what I'd just seen sent me into a panicked frenzy. Who were those people? Where are you taking me? I shouted. They unbuckled me from the chair, leaving the handcuffs on. But as they prepared to take me out from the room, the rotary phone at the back of the room started ringing. The men stopped dead in their tracks. Their calm expressions turned to ones of absolute terror. For a moment, they just stared at each other. The main interrogator nodded his head, at which point the second man diligently rushed over to the phone and picked it up. Hello? He asked nervously. The room fell silent as the man listened to the unknown voice on the other end. It was too quiet for us to hear, but the man's expression looked increasingly worried as the conversation went on. All the while, the interrogator just stared impatiently at his partner. After a brief minute that felt like an hour, he hung up and turned towards us. Who was it? The interrogator asked. They called from the outside. We have to let him go. The main interrogator didn't even question the orders. He just pulled a key from his pocket and unlocked my handcuffs. It doesn't change anything. We'll still eliminate the others, he said as he pulled the cold metal off my wrist. Did they say anything else? Yeah. He has to visit this address, the man said as he handed me a piece of paper containing a street name and a room number. On the bottom, a strange symbol had been stamped on. It felt odd to look at, as if the mark only partially existed, vanishing from my mind as soon as I took my eyes off it. He has to visit the core? Are you sure? The interrogator asked. The man just nodded in response, and they told me to give him a message. What message? I asked. I'll see you soon, Jack. Those were the last words the men ever spoke to me before they ushered me into the elevator. They looked angry, but more than anything, they seemed afraid of what was to come. I had been freed, but despite my miraculous escape from the facility, I didn't feel safe. After all that, I hadn't the faintest clue where I was going. Still, I had a sinking feeling of absolute dread building up within me. A certainty that no matter what I did, things would only get worse from there.